I'm Ahava Tag. Today, I'm joined by my friend Virna O'Brien, Director of Digital Services at UMass Memorial Health, to talk about digital marketing, websites, and more. You've got questions, we've got answers. Let's get into it. Virna, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
So, you have experience as a writing consultant and editor, which is rare in the digital space. How has that experience shaped your approach to digital transformation?
So I think when I think about that, I think that like language builds bridges between people and technology, right? So digital transformation isn't only about technology, it's about clarity of purpose and communication. We're all communicators. And leaders who value language understand that every transformation lives or dies by how well people understand why change is happening and what's in it for them. And good writing equals good user experience. Those who appreciate writing tend to think in terms of audience, flow, and comprehension. I'm definitely like a detail-oriented person, so I'm kind of a grammarian, and that kind of attention to detail will often translate into being a perfectionist when it comes to the user experience and how the page is laid out. So I think there are a lot of applications between those things.
Yeah, I agree with you. We just got a question from a potential client. Are you a strategy consultancy? Or are you a copywriting company? Are you a content production company? And my response to them was every piece of content has strategy behind it. That's what writers do. They think about, what do I want this person to feel? What do I want them to do with this information? How do I want them to follow this content pathway? And so it's always strategy for a writer. It's always about what you're thinking about. You want the reader to feel and do. So it's such a good example of what you're saying. Sometimes I'll say to people, language is a technology. It's a tool designed to help us communicate with each other. And so when you think about technology itself, if the language of how to use technology isn't clear, how many times have they said, press this button and this will happen? And that doesn't happen.
Absolutely. And a leader who appreciates language will push for specificity, right? What do we mean by digital front door? Who is our user? How will we define engagement? So precision is really important when it comes to digital transformation.
You've been described as a fantastic advocate for patient-friendly language, which we really appreciate. Someone who really holds the line when it comes to clarity and accessibility. Do you have any advice for our listeners who may be facing pushback from subject matter experts?
One of our guiding principles when we built the website is that the patients are our top priority. It's critical that we translate clinical expertise into language that patients can understand and trust. Like, trust is so critical when you're a healthcare system. And being able to understand what you're saying is so important. Aligning patients with how people search is so important. Aligning language with how people search is critical for SEO. People don't search for oncology or nephrology. They search for cancer care. They search for kidney disorders. So they use plain language. And from a technical perspective, that's how Google rewards the results that it returns. You have to line up with how people are searching.
I think it's really interesting that you're saying that, especially within the view of AI search overview. So people have asked me, has your content rating actually changed since this AI stuff has happened? And I said, I think the main thing that we've done, the basics are still there, but one of the things we've pulled back is like into the questions. In other words, you can't just say, what is supraventricular tachycardia? You have to start off with, why is my heart beating so fast? And I think connecting that for doctors and stakeholders, I don't always want to blame the doctors, but is really important for them to understand that the way people are searching now and what the results are that are coming back to them are even plainer than they were before. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. If you think about the way patients search for information, it should be as easy for them to understand as possible. And then one of the things that I always talk to subject matter experts about, and I'd love to hear your take on this, is as we teach them and educate them about the condition, we can give them those more complex medical terms so that they feel comfortable with them. Do you ever talk to your doctors or, again, your stakeholders about, let's start off in plain language, and then as we get into more complex subjects, we can introduce the topics so that people feel comfortable understanding what they are?
I'm not sure that we've really gone to that level of progression. We tend to focus on making sure that we're writing for the patient. However, if the service line, for example, has a strong referral base, then you understand that there's a secondary audience there who's a provider that is more interested in the clinical language. And you can write with that audience in mind too, as sort of a sub story on the same page. Hey, for referring providers, then you can speak in their language. And now you're speaking in the language of both audiences, but again, trying to keep in mind who your
Right.
primary is.
Right. And I think what you're saying is actually really important for people who are doing searching inside of LLMs, because if they're going to AI to search, a doctor could be searching for who's the closest physician who treats this thing. And if you don't have that content on your website and it's not in the words that they're asking for, like they're saying who treats supraventricular tachycardia, not who treats why does my heart beat so fast, you have to have both of those kinds of content on your website. It's an excellent, excellent point. You led a massive redesign project merging multiple entities under one digital enterprise, and you won an award. Congratulations.
Thank you.
How have you balanced the technical logistics of a large web rebuild with the human side, helping people feel part of one system?
So I would say that the most important thing we did during the strategy and planning phase was assemble a cross-functional working group with representation across all of our functional, well, not all, but a lot of our functional areas of the website and community hospital representation. So it truly was a collaboration, and we welcomed and respected all voices. And because we had the right representation with the key decisions we were being made, everyone felt like they were part of the process and there were no surprises. When there were differences of opinion that we needed to reconcile, we turned to data, research, and best practices to get to alignment. So one of the things that I found, because I'm a very data-driven person, I like to use data a lot in making informed decisions, is most people won't argue with data. Like if you show them Google Trends and show them the difference in search volume between oncology and cancer, they'll see that the
Absolutely.
data doesn't lie. And so they come around, if you will. So we did a lot of that. We used research to build the website. We use data to optimize the website.
I think marketers have felt more empowered as they've had more data to go and make those arguments with doctors to say, let me show you what's really going on here. What would you tell a marketer who really wants to develop expertise in a certain area? You really do have a set of expertise in these areas of plain language and digital transformation, and you just ran this huge site rebuild. How does somebody get better at what they're doing in the confines of a professional workplace?
That's a great question. I would say you have to be curious, right? You can't stop learning. I've always been a person who seeks to understand what's new, what's emerging. So I make it my business to follow thought leaders, to do research on things that I'm curious about. But I think to continually have that growth mindset and to be constantly learning and evolving because the space, like when you're in digital, the space is evolving at a ridiculous speed. So just trying to stay on top of all of the trends that are happening, you have to be curious. Otherwise, you get left behind.
I think the being curious and the learning is really important. What do you do when you come into conflicting sets of information? Because I find that very often that one expert that I trust will say one thing, and another expert that I trust will say the exact opposite. How do you make a decision on what to do in those situations?
I just had something like that happen. And you're probably aware of it because you were involved in it.
Why do you think I asked the question?
Yeah, the websites are dead one. No, websites are not dead. Just like anything else, you have to form your own opinion. You have to have a critical mindset. You have to gather opinions from different people, think on your own, look into the data. Like, what's the data telling us? Is our traffic volume in the toilet? If it is, then we do one thing. If it's not and it's steady, then, the sky is not falling. So again, I think data and following thought leaders and just have to have like the ability to discern what's fact from fiction and do your own research, right?
I don't love predictions in general. I used to write this column for a tech like online site, and I used to make a prediction every year, and every year I would go back and say, this is the prediction I made, how right was I? And very often I maybe was a little bit right, but not all the way there, right? And I used to make 3 predictions, and very often on only one was I a little bit right. I thought that nobody can really forecast the future. What I do think is really fascinating about that particular argument about websites are dead is that it's a great headline, but it's missing a really valuable point, which is that the argument that's being made is that only data is going to matter in the future. Content is data. Content is absolutely data. Data is what informs decision making. And so to say that you're not going to need all of that content to help people make these decisions is crazy. It just completely skips over the human side of being a healthcare consumer and understanding a healthcare consumer. I love what you said about looking at your own data and figuring it out for yourself. But the other thing that I always think about is, at the end of the day, what's being sold here? Is it an opinion to help people move forward, or is it an opinion to sell something? I also try to look at the rigor of the data collection process. Like, doing 26 searches in your own house isn't necessarily the answer to the amount of data that this industry has about what's really happening on their own websites. We had an amazing conversation with a cancer center. They came to us and they're like, our traffic's in the toilet. And I'm like, how are your conversions? And they're like, actually, they're going up. I'm like, well, then you don't need us. You're doing good. Because all of that traffic was vanity metrics. A lot of that traffic came from overseas. A lot of that traffic came from regions that weren't going to travel to you. They were just trying to get educated. Who is your core customer, and are you answering their questions? That should be what people are thinking about. And you're right, there's a lot of different places to do that. It's not just a website anymore, but the website is the central holding space for that data. And I just don't see how that technology is going to change that quickly in the next, forget about 10 years, like even 5 years. I just don't see us really moving away from that fast, because what you would be asking systems to do is completely change their stacks, completely change their architectures, and completely change the way that they've done business. And if there's one thing you and I know, nothing moves that fast. So.
No, definitely not in healthcare.
This is a question that's really important, because I think a lot of people would really want to hear from you about this. Site consolidations are huge right now, and a lot of marketers are staring down their own site consolidations. And you just went through one and you won an award for it. Most people don't even know where to start, or if they do know where to start, they feel overwhelmed by what has to happen. Can you tell me one or two pieces of advice that you wish you had had when you started?
The most important thing in my mind is to pick great partners, both internally and externally, right? Don't try to go it alone. It is incredibly overwhelming if you try to do it by yourself. So build a capable internal working team that can help you with decision making. Everybody brings their subject matter expertise to the table, and having all those voices to help guide is so important, because once you go live with the website, everybody's already there with you. You don't have to convince people why you did it a certain way, because they're part of the process. And I think that was one of the most important things that we did, was just the collaboration was huge with the working team. And then the strategic partners, of course, right? Pick really good partners. We picked Aha to help with content development. You guys are best in breed. You know what you're doing. You have content that drives results. And so don't try to think you could go one size fits all. We had great design. We had great development agency that did the development. And it's just important to have the right experts at the table so that you can get to a great finished product.
I think also having experts that you trust, but that also can give you guidance when you come to a fork in the road and it's like, well, what's the best practice for us? So inform me with the best practices from the industry, but then what should we do as UMass to really move forward with what we were trying to accomplish?
That's really important, because one of the things that we saw, that there was a lot of inconsistency across different systems and how they approached different challenges. So it was so important for us to kind of look at the landscape and see if there were trends. If the trend said this, then maybe we go with that trend. If it was like all over the map, then it was more of an exercise of, well, what's the right thing for us to do? Because there isn't really consistency with this particular thing.
Yeah, I agree with that. We come up against that a lot, where it's like, where should certain pages live in the architecture? And while I think that that's very important, I think search is changing that even more than it has it previously. But when we will do those comparisons to see, it's like, there is no best way to do this. Most of the time, it's going to come down to politics at your system more than anything. So just as long as it's all making sense within the architecture of the site, I think that that's the most important thing. So yeah, I definitely feel like there are macro and micro issues that are consistent across the board. And then, like you said, macro and micro issues that are just all over the place. And very often when I look at certain things, I think to myself, this decision was made because of a political reason and not necessarily because it really made sense for the user. Do you know what I mean?
You can't win all the battles.
Exactly. I was just about to say, don't die on that sword. I agree with that.
I'm curious about building for the patient versus building for internal department structure. We get a lot of partners who would like the website to reflect the structure of their department. How would you advise a client to think about organizational structure versus patient centricity? So if you're trying to figure out where to put diagnostic radiology on a web page, does it belong with the cancer page if it's being used to diagnose something in cancer, or does it need to reflect how the department is structured? We get into that sort of stuff quite a
All
bit, and I'm curious what your perspective is.
That's a great question. And I love that you asked it. I always go back to the business strategy of the organization. So, my question is, does diagnostic radiology get the majority of its revenue stream from oncology? And if that's the case, does it make sense for the diagnostic radiology page to be embedded with oncology? Or are there a lot of other services that use diagnostic radiology, and therefore should they all be directed towards the diagnostic radiology page? And then that page has for cancer patients, for whatever other kinds of patients there are. I can't think of anything right now. So that's really what I always use to sort of talk through that whole department structure. I want to support the business and accomplishing what the business needs to accomplish, but I also need to support the patient in finding what they need. And I also need to understand where diagnostic radiology fits into their journey. The beautiful thing about the web is that you can link to pages, and it doesn't necessarily matter where they live. It really matters that they have search visibility and that people can find them when they need them. So that's how I think about it, and that's how I try to talk about it. I once got into an argument between a neurosurgeon and an otolaryngologist, an ear, nose, and throat surgeon, about who should own the acoustic neuroma page. And they're sitting there arguing about this. And I said to them, where do the majority of appointments get made? Through neurosurgery or through ENT? And they were like, through neurosurgery. And I'm like, then that's where it lives. Even if you're coming in as the partner to help make sure the surgery is great, we can talk about that. And we can even make sure that it shows up in your content on the ENT side as well. But at the end of the day, if the appointments are being made through neurosurgery, then that's where the page belongs, because ENT isn't going to stumble on it. So they looked at me like, oh, wow, that really makes logical sense. This is why you're a doctor and I'm a content strategist.
Yeah, because most patients will get a diagnosis. So they'll go to the service page that reflects their diagnosis. And then if they need additional diagnostic imaging, they'll be referred for that. It's not a patient-directed service. So it's a little bit different in how I would think about it, right? Because I don't elect to get diagnostic radiology. A provider will let me know once I have a potential condition. I'll go to the condition page and then want to see what my options are there. I may not always be right, but there's a certain logic in how we approach these.
I think it's a really good point. I think you're totally getting at a point that I didn't even really get at, which is exactly. But what I was thinking about was, how does this fit into the patient journey? If it fits into the patient journey through oncology, then it should be there, because that oncology patient is probably going to want to click around and learn more about their diagnosis and what's going to happen to them. One of the things I always think about is, for a breast cancer patient, there are so many different tests that they go through. Should there be separate pages on breast cancer testing, or should they just be directed to the plain MRI test, to the plain CT scan test, to the plain oncology? And it really has to do with resources. It has to do with, how much revenue does this generate for the system? And do we have the resources to create that content? And do we have the resources to update it? Because breast cancer changes a lot. You know what I mean? So it's not one of those disease states that just kind of stays the same for years and years and years. So these are all really important questions. And that's why when people are like, oh, what's the big deal about content strategy? It's like, you have no idea. We're so lucky. We get to dive into so many different things. It's the business, it's human behavior, it's how the patient journey goes, it's what medical science is doing, what legislation is coming through. Are they going to pay for me to get a mammogram every year? Or are they only going to pay every other year? And so that's why I think it's such an exciting field, and it's a lot more complicated, I think, than people even realize.
Yeah, continuous optimization has to be the mantra. Like,
Exactly.
just you
Continuous
can't have a
learning.
set it and forget it mindset.
Thank you so much for joining me, Virna. It was so wonderful to have you.
Thank you as well.
And thanks to our viewers for joining in. I hope you got the answer you needed today. If you have a burning question, put it in the comments or email me at ahava.leaptech@ahamediagroup.com. See you next time.